at the White House. Now, at the White House, when the two leaders were speaking to the media, many bilateral issues were discussed and spoken about by both the leaders with the media. The one that stood out the most, obviously, yesterday was President Trump's statements about being willing to mediate on the Kashmir issue between Pakistan and India. And he went on to say how Prime Minister Modi 2 weeks ago had said to him in a meeting, had asked him, would you be willing to mediate in this issue, which surprised everybody. And especially it shook up India's media and the people over there. Indian media and the Foreign Office there are vehemently denying that Prime Minister Modi ever said this. Amongst this, other issues were discussed to improve bilateral ties between the two countries. Very important bilateral issues, especially concerning Afghanistan and trade ties, security issues, etc., were discussed. So we will be talking about all these things today with our guests in our studio. Very interesting meeting yesterday. Let's go on and talk about it with AVM Ikram Mullah, who's with us in our studios today, and Dr. Khurram Iqbal. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us today. And AVM Ikram Mullah, let's start with you. Let's go into this discussion about Kashmir. Now, this is the main big topic these days, right now, as of yesterday, that everybody is talking about. President Trump said that I will be willing to mediate on Kashmir, and I would be willing to play a middleman between Pakistan and India. And Prime Minister Modi has asked me to do so 2 weeks ago. Now, where is this comment coming from? Because India's side has vehemently denied that this was ever said by Prime Minister Modi, because they've had this very hardline stance that this is a bilateral issue and they will not even discuss the issue of Kashmir. So what would you like to say about that?
Well, you see, the Americans have a historical responsibility to Kashmir, because if you go back into history, 1962, the Sino-Indian War, Pakistan had an excellent opportunity to just walk into Kashmir because the Indians were occupied or engaged in the north with the Chinese. And it was on the American behest that Pakistan, of course, held its horses and did not move in. And ever since, the ball has been in America's court vis-a-vis the solution of the Kashmir issue. And now when we have the American president making a statement publicly that he would be willing and ready to mediate between the two countries to solve this 70-year-old issue. And when he mentions that it is on the request of Prime Minister Modi of India. And on the other side, we have the Indian Ministry of External Affairs totally, outrightly denying it altogether. Now, President Trump is not expected to make a comment which is absolutely or totally unfounded, baseless. So I'm sure that Mr. Modi and Kashmir must have come together somewhere in his mind. Mm-hmm. And during his meeting with Mr. Modi, as and when it happened, there must have been a mention of Kashmir. Mm-hmm. Now, if the American president has understood it to be an Indian request to mediate in the solution of this issue, of course, that is his understanding and his perception. Yeah. But the fact remains that it must be founded on some indication by the Indian Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. Whereas, of course, the Indians have always maintained for the last several years their stance that they will like to handle all issues with Pakistan bilaterally without any third party's intervention. And they continue to harp on this years-old mantra of where they always say that first of all, Pakistan has to stop this cross-border terrorism, and only then they will enter into any talks or negotiations. And that is the reason that Pakistan has not had any indirect talks with India on any of its issues, except lately that we have this Kartarpur corridor, which is fortunately another platform on which the two countries can sit together and talk. But unfortunately, the level has been so low that no serious discussion can take place other than Kartarpur, like bilateral trade or improving relations or talking about Kashmir. So right. That is very, very limited, very restricted.
Right. Sir, the Foreign Office spokesperson in India also said that he went on to say that the Shimla Agreement and the Lahore Declaration provide the basis to resolve all issues between India and Pakistan. And the Lahore Declaration says that the resolution of all outstanding issues, including Jammu and Kashmir, is essential, and the parties agreed to intensify their efforts to resolve all issues, including including the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It clearly says that. So they're saying themselves that this is going to be on the basis of the Lahore Declaration, the Shimla Agreement, which was prior to that. So, Dr. Khurram, what would you like to say? Like, does this show that there is some opening for talks with India about Kashmir after the statement from the Foreign Office? They're referring to the Lahore Declaration and Shimla Agreement, which clearly say that the Kashmir issue has to be resolved between the two parties. And then President Trump saying that he wants to be the mediator. So, where do you see this heading?
I think with regards to Kashmir, there are a lot of deliberations going on, especially after the Pulwama attack in the regional and global capitals, because the Pulwama attacks has categorically unleashed one harsh reality that Kashmir remains a nuclear flashpoint. And I think it might have been a post-Pulwama scenario, the involvement of Americans, which would have brought Kashmir to the attention of President Trump, and he might have realized that without resolving Kashmir, you cannot really attain long-term and stable South Asia. As far as Modi's policies are concerned, or Indian policies with regards to Kashmir are concerned, during his first tenure, he has relied extensively on the excessive use of force to deal with Kashmir. We have seen Indian government, Indian military forces targeting innocent civilians, demolishing their houses, and using pellet guns against the innocent Kashmiris. But that seems
500,000 strong army is there right now.
That's true. But that's policy of use of force seems not to be working in case of Kashmir, because what we see at the moment that now there is an arrival of transnational jihadists inside Kashmir. Historically, Kashmir's militant movement has remained pretty indigenous. Even now, the Kashmir militant movement is pretty indigenous, but now, after the arrival of few elements attached to Daesh and Al-Qaeda, there's a fear that this militancy may become transnational. And if that becomes transnational, I think that things will spin out of control of India. So there is a dire need that the policymakers in India must reconsider their policies vis-a-vis Kashmir. As far as their policy of demographic shifts is concerned, what they call non-kinetic counterinsurgency policy vis-a-vis Kashmir, that too has failed. Demographic engineering has never paid off. If you try to change the demographic patterns of Kashmir by bringing more Sikhs and Hindus inside Kashmir, that would certainly evoke reaction and retaliation from the Kashmiris. So all these so-called kinetic and non-kinetic means of pacifying Kashmir's freedom struggle have failed. There's a need that India start considering talking to Pakistan and give up its rigid stance that has been holding that Kashmir is a bilateral issue. The issue is that the disparity between India and Pakistan has increased so much in so many ways that there is certainly a need for third-party mediation, and America is rightly positioned to play that role. And if President Trump has issued that statement, Pakistan has rightly welcomed this stance from the United States of America.
Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah, would you say that the US's pro-India policy in South Asia, the India-centric policy that they've continuously had, do you think that might be thawing and changing a little bit? Do you see a bit of movement in that direction, that it's making Pakistan more included in its South Asia policy than it was before, rather than the
India, Pakistan and the US have had historically very close relations for the last almost 60 years, since the mid-50s all the way until today, although there have been certain ups and downs in between, but the relationship has continued. And Pakistan has remained in the American camp all along. And whereas when we look at the Indians, we know that it is only very recent that the Americans are warming up towards the Indians, and they have always remained in the Russian camp.
Yeah, exactly.
And as of now, we find that there are a couple of developments that India has ordered the S-400 missiles from Russia, which of course the Americans have not approved of. But on the other hand, the Indians have decided to cut off their import of oil from Iran just to please the Americans. And the Indians, of course, have made their available to the US to be used against China. That's another factor, that's another development in the region. But the fact remains that the Indians have not broken their ties with the Russians, and they continue to foster them, they continue to promote them. So the Americans would realize that how reliable or how credible is India as a counterbalance or a counterweight vis-a-vis China. Plus, we were just talking about Pulwama, and then when we move on to the events of 26th and 27th February, the whole world witnessed, and the Americans of course, that here is a country which has undertaken this adventure or misadventure, wherein there was a terrorist activity in Pulwama, and thereafter they became the investigator, the judge and the prosecutor at the same time, and they decided that yes, they need to carry out this punitive strike against Pakistan. And the bloody nose that they got after that, which I'm sure would make the rest of the world and the Americans especially to think that here is a neighbor which is many times smaller, and here is a country which has attempted this punitive strike, and they were not able to achieve whatever they wanted to, and instead they got an embarrassing reply.
Yes, and now the recent verdict of the International Court of Justice
True.
on Kulbhushan Yadav, do you think that also had an impact on the way America perceives what India is doing in
Certainly,
Pakistan?
because the admissions of Kulbhushan Yadav, his confessional statements, and the upholding of the military court's decision by the International Court clearly indicate that India, at least as far as Kulbhushan is concerned, is a country which has inflicted terror in a neighboring country. And when we look at the statements of Ajit Doval, we look at the statement of even their Prime Minister on the Republic Day, in which he expressed interest in Balochistan and activities over there. Of course, they are all visible to the world and to the Americans, and here is a clear combination of statements, events, which very clearly bring it out that here is India which is fostering terrorism in Pakistan. So with those kind of credentials, I'm sure it would be a food for thought for the Americans, and they would reconsider, they'll have a second thought whether they can totally rely on India as a partner in whatever strategic long-term designs they may have in this region vis-a-vis China. So with that background, I think the Americans are now, as it appears, are having a second thought, and they are again warming up to Pakistan. And of course, there is the question of Afghanistan, there is a question of a peaceful withdrawal of their troops from Afghanistan. And then there is the question of Pakistan in a position to support the American withdrawal. So I think with all these factors combined, the Americans and especially Mr. Trump has really thought it through, and now they're having second thoughts, because if you look at just a year ago, the statements that Mr. Trump had been making against Pakistan, now the situation is totally different.
It's totally turned around. So, Dr. Khurram, now President Trump referred to the 1.3 billion aid that used to come in the form of military assistance, coalition support fund, through the coalition support fund, and he said that at that time when they were giving these funds to Pakistan, he said Pakistan could have done a lot in the past but did not respect our leadership, but maybe they have a different leadership now. So these words, how do you take them? What was he referring to? That they did not respect our leadership, they could have done a lot in the past, and now maybe they have a different leadership now. What do you think he meant by that exactly?
I think this particular sentence was intended for the domestic consumption. President Trump just wanted to make a point to his domestic constituency that, see, now there's a Pakistan which listens to us and it has changed its policy. Okay. The fact of matter remains that Pakistan's policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan has not changed at all. Since day one, Pakistan has advocated for a peaceful solution of Afghan problem. We have always maintained that the use of force will not work in case of Afghanistan, that both sides, including the Americans, Afghan Taliban and other factions involved in the civil war, need to sit together and find out a political solution. This is what Pakistan has maintained since 2001 when the Americans came inside. The problem is that there was no, Americans were not receptive to this idea. If you recall, George W. Bush Jr., he had the policy of no dialogue with terrorists. He was of the view that Americans would not sit on the same table with the terrorists, the Afghan Taliban. But that gradually changed when President Obama took office. He hinted that we are willing to sit together, and now President Trump, now he has shown that America is serious in engaging talks with Afghan Taliban, and he has basically walked the talk. If you talk about President Trump, he promised in his electoral campaign that we are going to resolve the Afghan issue, which has costed American almost $45 billion per year and thousands of lives of American soldiers, including Afghans as well. So Pakistan has maintained a singular policy with regards to Afghanistan. We have been able to convince the Americans over the passage of time that this is the way forward with regards to Afghanistan. I think one reason that America has is now warming up to Pakistan is also linked to Afghanistan, because as the Americans' forces withdraw from Afghanistan, they would certainly need a safe passage. There is one side from the Soviet Union which is quite long, which is, I would say, there are a lot of challenges there. From the Iranian side, of course, the relations are not that cordial between the two sides, and Pakistan provides a safe passage, logistically speaking, because it is not just airlifting few thousand troops from Afghanistan, bringing them to American bases somewhere. It also involves movement and of military logistics, which are quite heavy and big. So that is also one thing. One point, I think, which should have been the part of agenda when our Prime Minister met President Trump: what is next after Afghanistan? Our relations with Afghanistan, with the US, have always been transactional. They have always been very tactical, driven by events. This is time that we forge strategic relations with the US. There's a changing world, of course. United States preeminence is not there as it was in the post-1990s, but United States of America still remains one of the major powers that you see on the international landscape. So what is after the American troops withdraw from Afghanistan? How Pakistan and US would deal with their bilateral relations in case if there is a military confrontation between United States of America and Iran. So these are the issues. And then the issue of Indian hegemonic role in South Asia. This is an event-driven analysis that perhaps now America might be reconsidering its South Asian policy, because it has met, Donald Trump has met Imran Khan. But if you look at their global strategic paper, it categorically places India as the regional policeman of South Asia. So as long as that strategic guideline is there, United States will still prioritize India when it comes to South Asia. But there are some indicators of change that create some space for Pakistan, and that's the space where Pakistan needs to operate to diversify its policy options.
Right, and Pakistan's relations with the US are always seen through the Afghan prison, like we've been discussing in all the programs these days. And now President Trump said that, he tends to give these offhand statements, and also he said that we can wipe off Afghanistan from the map in 1 week, but I don't want to take so many lives and all. So now, okay, all right, we understand that they have that technology, but lately with the Afghanistan talks, it's clearly seen that the Taliban are sort of in a strong negotiating position. They're calling the shots. So who's in the strong position here? Because obviously we know that America has a military might, yet the Taliban are still making their conditions met. They refuse to meet with Afghan leaders, etc., and Pakistan's been asked to help. So what do you say about that in that statement?
Well, you see, the Americans continue to be the sole superpower until today. And of course, Mr. Donald Trump is quite conscious of that. And after Vietnam, it is going to be, quite a humbling experience for them to come out of Afghanistan after 18 years. without a peace deal, or with a peace deal which is not very much in their favor. And he would continue to, like to reiterate that while they have the capability and the capacity to kinetically, bulldoze their decision or impose their decision in Afghanistan, but the fact remains, they can use their air power, they can drop bombs, they can kill people, but as far as feet on ground is concerned, they'll not be able to do that. And I'm sure he's aware of it. His generals must have briefed him. And I think he made this comment just to, go back to his superpower status and reiterate to the world that while we may be withdrawing from Afghanistan, we had the capacity, we had the capability, and we opted not to use that capacity and capability and come out peacefully. In a way, he's trying to score a point and appear peaceful and appear like a good man and solve this issue. And I think we can give him a credit for that. But the fact remains that if this statement, in my mind, was made with this background, that he still likes to reiterate to the world that the Americans remain the sole superpower until today.
Right. So going forward now, the success of the peace talks are going to depend on several factors: Afghanistan-US peace talks, and Pakistan's role to restore bilateral ties with the United States. The role in Afghanistan is going to be looked at very carefully. That what was their role. So not everything is going to be dependent on Pakistan. So at the moment, how strong exactly is Pakistan's influence over the Taliban that they're able to get them to come on the table with the Afghan government and able to enable the results that the United States wants? Dr. Khurram?
I think this is what will be on the top of agenda when General Bajwa meets his friends in Pentagon, because it is very important to manage expectations at this point, this critical time. Number of capitals around the world, sometimes they tend to over-exaggerate Pakistan's leverage over Afghan Taliban. Yes, we have maintained contacts with the leadership of Afghan Taliban, which are becoming handy and useful to bring them and convince them on the negotiation
which have enabled
table,
us to gain this credibility again with the United States.
But whether Afghan Taliban listen to us completely, that remains to be seen. Because during last 18 years of insurgency, things have transformed dramatically. Yes, there was a time when Pakistan was one of 3 countries in the world which had recognized Taliban regime, with which it maintained diplomatic relations, and yes, relations were quite strong. But then came the American invasion. After the invasion, Taliban leadership and foot soldiers, most of them, they slipped into Pakistan, taking advantage of the porous border that exists between the 2 countries. But then Pakistan came under intense international pressure to act against the sanctuaries, which Pakistan did, sometimes kinetically, sometimes non-kinetically. And when I say non-kinetic measures, that also include the border fencing that Pakistan has undertook that costed us around 35 billion rupees at the moment. So those initiatives by Pakistan encouraged Afghan Taliban to diversify their own source of external support. There came a time when most of the families of Afghan Taliban, they relocated from Balochistan to Iran. And Iran emerged as an important source of external support for Afghan Taliban. So Pakistan does maintain contacts with Afghan Taliban, which are becoming quite useful. But Afghan Taliban, they play their cards very smartly. Pakistan, yes, when there was a time when Afghan Taliban were reluctant to even, to have any sort of contact with the Afghan government, but on the pressure of Pakistan, on the request of Pakistan, they have talked to non-governmental Afghan officials in Moscow, in Qatar, and other places. So that diplomatic leverage or pressure is certainly working. But whether Afghan Taliban would be there to listen completely to Pakistan, that is.
And there are other factors that can derail the peace process in Afghanistan. So, like for example, if there's the situation heating up in the Persian Gulf with Iran, Iran has significant influence in Afghanistan as well. There's so many other factors at play over there that is not entirely in Pakistan's control or the United States. So, this relationship, then how vulnerable is it to such developments?
Well, you see, it has taken 18 years for the Americans to eventually realize that they can come out of Afghanistan only through negotiations. And as we were just talking a little while ago, that the earlier American regimes were not even willing to sit down with the Taliban and negotiate.
Yeah.
And now that they are negotiating, there is a constant need for the Americans. There's a constant commitment and a promise by the American president that they will eventually come out of Afghanistan. And here we have a situation where we have advanced to a very great extent, and now we are very close to the final solution. Mm-hmm. So I think any development in the Gulf of a military nature, we may take away part of the attention of the Americans, but I wonder whether it would be have an influence which might disrupt or stop or slow down this progress on the Afghanistan situation. I don't think so, because I think the Afghanistan situation is to quite an extent isolated from the situation in the Gulf. I mean, it is standalone by itself. While the Iranians are in a position to influence it, they could have some leverage over the Taliban, but not to an extent where they would be, in a position to, God forbid, disrupt the peace process. Mm-hmm. Because I think Taliban are also in a position now to realize what's best for them. I think they have also been indulging into this conflict for such a long time. We often talk of fatigue setting in even amongst the Taliban.
Right.
They are in touch with Russians, with Chinese, with Pakistan, with Germans, with Qataris. And in all this international players being present over there, Iran alone, I don't think would be in a position to impress upon the Taliban to an extent that they slow down or stop the peace process. So I think any situation, any untoward development in Gulf, in my view, would not have any negative impact on the development of peace in Afghanistan.
Right. So President Trump also spoke about the trade between the two countries. He said that we can quadruple it and we can increase it 10 times or 20 times even. Those were his words. So what is the potential now for Pakistan to increase trade with the United States, and which direction can that be headed in?
Well, there could be two options for Pakistan to seek trade opportunities in the United States of America. First is to expand the market for its product in United States of America. Second is to basically engage American investors to invest in Pakistan, where it would be a win-win situation for the both countries. As far as the first option is concerned, we must not forget that at the moment United States of America is engaged in trade wars, not only with its adversaries but with some allies as well. It has not spared its NATO allies. It has not spared even India recently. United States of America has increased tariff on number of Indian products which were reaching American markets during last 3 decades with very low tariffs, despite the fact that India is key to America's Asian strategy. President Trump has not spared India, and that has led to some differences between the two sides as well. So if that's the case with the friends, we have just started to warm up towards the United States of America. We should not expect too much with regards to trade. Yes, but Prime Minister Imran Khan did the right thing when he spoke to the American investors of Pakistani origin. He introduced the opportunities which exist in Pakistan. The third option that is a possible in a possible scenario, Pakistan at the moment lacks infrastructure. We have looked towards China in the past to help us develop infrastructure through mega developmental projects like China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but United States of America has concerns over it. We have tried to allay those fears of the Americans, but so far we have not been able to be successful, in convincing Americans that CPAC poses no threat to American interests in this part of the world. But what we have seen that United States, there is an alternative thinking in America that to counter increasing economic ingress of China in Asia, there is a need to launch American version of Belt and Road Initiative, that America should offer mega developmental projects to all the countries in the third world, in the developing world, to counter. I think that is something where Pakistan can chip in, where Pakistan can actually benefit from. Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was a proposal floated by President Obama, that's not there any longer, but Trump administration is certainly working on few projects to develop infrastructure in Asia and Africa. So these are few avenues where Pakistan can engage with the United States of America to take economic benefits.
Right. Okay. So now one of the another development from coming out of this trip of Prime Minister Imran Khan in the United States is that Pakistan has finally engaged a lobbying firm in Washington, because this had not taken place before. We didn't even have a foreign minister in place previously, and now we do have a foreign minister who's working towards Pakistan's interests continuously, and many people say he's doing a very good job. So, sir, what would you like to say about that? Because in the past we've seen how strong the Indian lobby is in the United States, and we saw the huge diaspora community there in Washington, and they're spread all over the United States. This is just a small portion of the diaspora, Pakistani diaspora in the United States. Why has Pakistani Americans, why have they not been this active previously? And what has been the reason for this lobbying that's been lacking on Pakistan's side?
Well, the peculiarity of the American system is that, of course, they get prompted by lobbyists or lobbying firms, and several countries in the world, they have appointed their firms within the US to pursue their interests, their viewpoint, and bring about a policy change or a decision in their favor vis-a-vis America. And Pakistani governments have been off and on engaged into hiring lobbying firms in the US, but it was not consistent. And luckily or unluckily, what happened was that these firms are essentially engaged not to pursue the interests of Pakistan, but probably to pursue the interests of particular regimes. And that is why they could not be consistent. And also we found that whenever we had the previous governments, the diaspora in the US, especially the Pakistani diaspora, it was always divided, or the divisions were clearly visible, and hence they could not be united, they could not be unified, and hence they could not in a united manner forcefully project Pakistan's cause or support it within their political circles. But in the case of the present government, we find that Mr. Imran Khan has a lot of supporters in Pakistani expats in the US. And the clear demonstration was there in that hall that they got together. So I think now Pakistan is in a position to, with the, of course, assistance of this lobbying firm and the diaspora getting together, I think Pakistan's narrative, Pakistan's viewpoint would be able to be forcefully moved and projected and pursued in the American policymakers and decision makers, even their academia, in their media, in their think tanks. And I think we can hope for a good future for Pakistan-USA relationship in the coming days.
Yes, because it's a significant relationship. So, Dr. Khurram, going forward now, what needs to be done? Because we had discussed earlier before the program that it's not just the United States president making a few statements, there's also a whole bureaucracy behind him, and you have preset mindsets about Pakistan and what Pakistan needs to do, etc. So, going forward, where do you see this developing after this meeting, and how will this need to be carried forward?
I think relations between the two countries will stay warm and cordial until the last American troop withdraw and disengages from Afghanistan, because Americans would need Pakistan's help for the safe and honorable exit of American troops from the region. What happens after Afghanistan, I remain skeptical because there are very few areas of convergences between the two countries. What is happening at the moment is that the world is in transformation. Now there's a rise of alternate powers like China, Russia, and Pakistan is not the part of American camp any longer. Now we attach ourselves with a world which is emerging, which is rising in Asia. So if that's the case, if we sit in the opposing camp, that is bound to create problems with the United States of America. With China, we have a number of convergences, be it military, be it economic, be it political. But beyond Afghanistan, at the moment, we see nothing that can bring Pakistan and America together. I think Pakistani diplomats, Pakistani academia would have to dedicate a lot of efforts to find points of convergences with the United States of America in the decades to come. Because it is very important to engage with America. Even if American power is on decline, they're going to stay relevant in international affairs for decades to come. If that's the case, there's a need on our side to explore new avenues of cooperation with the Americans.
So, sir, okay, now the issue of the Kashmir that was discussed with President Trump. Now, President Bush made a similar offer after 9/11 to mediate between India and Pakistan on Kashmir. Now, after Pakistan did its part in fighting, eliminating terror camps and all of that, President Bush did not go through with this, his statement. So, what is the likelihood that this is going to be followed up by the U.S. administration after what the president has said? Because we've seen this go back in the past as well.
Well, President Musharraf was very close to reaching a deal, and it was unfortunate that just at the last moment the Indians had second thought and it could not move ahead. So while there is an urgent need and there is also a realization that this is a serious issue and it ought to be solved, and the American willingness is there to mediate. And it's now only the Indians who will have to decide that is this the right time for them to accept this mediation and go ahead and pursue and hopefully reach a solution. And I think the events of Pulwama and 26, 27 February have once again drawn the attention of the world, especially the big powers, that this area in the context of Kashmir remains a flashpoint, and which probably would prompt all of them to impress upon the Indians that yet another opportunity is rising, and it's wise to avail of it and sit down and negotiate and hopefully reach a solution.
What are the chances that Prime Minister Modi, now that he's strongly back in power, is going to take a stance like that, which is not very hugely popular with the people in India, with many people in India?
Well, you see, there are two views to it. Firstly, Mr. Modi wanted to come back into power second time, and he wanted to use his narrative of anti-Muslim, anti-Pakistan, or anti-minorities, and a strong stance on Kashmir. He's used that successfully and he's come back into power. Now, either he realizes that it doesn't have very good optics for the rest of the world, because sooner or later the world is going to see through it that this is not very honorable, this is not very just, it's not very fair, it's not very civilized, and now that he has achieved his objective, he could mend it and maybe follow a new line.
Right, okay.
Or he may decide that I have gone too far ahead. I have this bunch of or a huge chunk of Indian population whom I have trained to be hostile to minorities,
Absolutely.
to Pakistan, to the Muslims, and to be aggressive and cruel with the Kashmiris, and it is now impossible for me to revert or to go back.
Right, okay. So
and he pursues that policy.
Right. So now with the little bit of time that we have left, Dr. Khurram, Prime Minister Imran Khan extended an invitation to President Trump to visit Pakistan. What is the likelihood that he accepted, according to the foreign minister? What is the likelihood that he will visit Pakistan?
President Trump has done a lot of unconventional things, no matter how unpopular they are. I will not be surprised if he accepts Pakistan's invitation and decides to come to Pakistan in near future.
And sir, do you think he'll also?
I mean, I think it's quite like him that he will accept it and he will visit Pakistan.
Right. Thank you so much, Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah Sab and Dr. Khurram Iqbal. Thank you both for being with us today. Viewers, thank you for joining us today on World Today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now from Sharmeen Ali and our team at World Today.